Hi, good afternoon, everyone. This is your instructor in the class. Welcome after the break. We are ready to proceed where we were before moving to the lunch break and the part of demonstration. So let me quickly take you right across in there. Give me just a second. Right, so this was the PowerPoint presentation which we were discussing before moving to the lunch break, which was talking about creating a SQL database. We did create a couple of databases. Now it's really important to understand how does that work when we talk about having it at on-premises or working up with over the cloud and all. So in case what we've done so far, I've created 3 different databases. And important thing to note is third one is my elastic pool down there. So let's understand how does that work. In case of our on-prem infrastructure, in case of our on-premises infrastructure, when we plan our SQL Server installation, we go at the OS level first, defining the virtual cores and the processors, and then we install SQL Server on top of it. We can pretty much define our CPU affinity, what different CPU and the memory limits we want to apply at the server level. Well, over the cloud, that's different. So multiple ways. When we talk about SQL databases, so what SQL Server we have over the cloud, when I talk about Azure, that does not cost me anything. That typically doesn't have any compute background associated with it. But of course it does at the Microsoft's end, but that's the cloud provider's responsibility. In our case, we are utilizing it as a software as a service component. There, we create multiple databases or storage or elastic pools on top of it, and they will be the actual ones which will be having dedicated compute nodes associated with them. Having said that, how does it work? Let's take an example. If I go back to my portal, give me a second. Let me quickly go back to my Azure portal. Now, if I show you Microsoft Azure, let me go to my SQL Server real quick. So there is one, the SQL Server, which I created. If I open that SQL Server instance, you will notice we've got multiple resources underneath them. I've got 2 dedicated databases. Now it's important to understand, if you take a look right over here, you are saying that 2 virtual cores, 32 gig of storage, which I assigned, that's been assigned on the pricing tier. So that is the SKU size which will identify the pricing for these particular databases. You can always upscale or downscale them whenever needed. Auto scaling can also be happening based on alert rules down there. But what is important this time, if I'm creating a new database, let's go to SQL databases. And what if I would like to create a new SQL database down there? So let me click on create a database. It will eventually open the same blade where we were specifying all those informations. Now, important thing to notice, I've got my resource group over here. Let me have my database name. I want to call it GTLDB03. It will be created on this particular server. Now I'm going to explain you want to use SQL Elastic Pool field. What does it mean? If I'm saying it no, that means this database will be having a dedicated compute and storage associated to this particular database. And that's a best practice in case of HPC computes, high performance compute requirements, or where my database is performance centric applications are hosted communicating to that database. Whereas if it's a regular database, which might not require a dedicated compute associated to that, in this case, I can use Elastic Pool. The moment I do that, the compute and storage is gone. I'm selecting the name of my Elastic Pool, the one which I created. An important thing to notice is now this database, if I click on review and create, this database does not have any cost associated because the cost is already included in the pool. All right. So let me quickly click on create. Is that different the way we are creating dedicated database in terms of functionality, in terms of connectivity, in terms of connection strings? Everything is absolutely the same. The only difference is the performance and the cost. The performance will be decided if it's a dedicated database server, will give you more performance. If it's a pooled database, which is sharing resources among other databases, of course, there'll be some downsides in the performance down there. But in terms of costing, a dedicated database, a dedicated SQL database is going to cost you more than the shared pools databases down there. So it's once again a business decision which should be considered on which scenarios. So I created a couple of databases now. Let's understand how can we start utilizing that. So I'm moving home in here. Let me quickly go to my SQL databases. I created a couple of databases. Other one will be available right over here in a few moments once it's deployed. Let me go to DB02, the one which I created earlier. That was having a sample data associated with this. From the in portal experience, what I'm doing next is I'm clicking on the query editor. So it's an in preview feature. I would like to connect it from here. Before I do that, it will give me an error because it is supposed to be doing that. Let me tell you what that error is going to talk about, how that error and how we'll be resolving that. So first thing first, I like to see what's my IP, would like to see my public IP address associated with this connection. So this is my public IP address connected to the VPN. And this public IP address by default is not trusted by Azure infrastructure. And this is different in your case, guys. In case of on-prem, you deploy your database server, you create your databases, and people can start connecting to that. That doesn't really matter over there. Azure by default doesn't trust any external IP. So if I show you the error first, let me go to the database. I'm typing the username and password correctly with no typo errors or anything, but I'll be expecting an error over here related to my client IP address. And you see that this database server cannot open the connection with this IP address. We have to enable it on the server firewalls first. And this is important. So let me go to my overview, and right over here, I've got my server firewalls. So maybe I can show you from the database view as well. So let me go to my database right across in there. And on top, I've got some set server firewall. Important thing, when I click on set server firewall down here, we need to provide what would be the eligible IP addresses which would be able to connect it, whether it's from in portal or SQL Server Management Studio or Visual Studio Server Manager, whatsoever. Those clients are connected to a public IP which would like to perform some operations on the database, and we'd like to add them. Important thing, I can say like my IP01 for dev purposes, and I can have an entire IP range, or the system is intelligent enough to capture the current IP address just in case if it's the same one, all you need to do is add client IP. So, well, at this point of time, I've just added this particular IP address. Let me click on save. So important thing, I added an IP address exceptions to the list on the server firewall. I've updated my firewall rules. Now, let's get back to the SQL database. Let me click over here. Going back to my query editor, let me key in the password here. And bingo, we will be able to connect. There we are. So if you click on the tables, because it was a sample database with AdventureWorks sample data down there, you want to see the views down there, you want to see some of the stored procedures over there. It's all up in here. Let's take an example. If I right select asterisk from saleslt.customer, and let me run that. And I should be seeing my data listed up right across in here. Well, that's one example. I was trying to create this database, having some queries over here, maybe creating a table down there. Let's call it GTL visitors. I'm going to specify the details. Let's call it, it's going to be visitor ID, and creating it an identity with the seed value and step value. Let me make it primary key real quick and having the visitor name over here. Let's go for phone number, whatever. I mean, it's completely up to us. Just for demonstration, I created this table. And the next time when someone tries to do that, let's go for GTL visitors. Let me run that. And I can see that no result, but the table got created. I can, of course, insert values up in there. That's one small example of RDBMS having it on top of Azure. What's more important, let's say I'm moving to my hybrid cloud. I've got my data centers on West Coast as well. I've got my data center Southeast Asia as well. Let me log in on one of them. That's my RDP tool, a public RDP tool to do that. So let me log in real quick. And this time I'd like to go to a specific virtual machine. Give me just a second. Let me connect with one of my education cluster down here. And let me see which VMs currently open where I can actually work. That's the one. Just want to make sure it is 2154, number 5. Let me connect this one. That's the one which is assigned to me. Let me log in. So this is our infrastructure as a service virtual machine. Ideally, that's completely different. That is finance and operations with the one box development down there. But let me just minimize it. One more thing what we have over here is our SQL Server. An important thing to notice, let me disconnect this one over here real quick. And let me connect my database engine. First thing first, this is my SQL Server Management Studio. All I'm doing over here is connecting to an SQL Server on-prem edition. Let me click on connect with my Windows authentication. And there I am. It's just like a SQL Server on-prem installation with all the databases, mirroring SQL Server agent, integration services, analysis services, and all. What else I would like to do? Well, I would like to connect to my database server, which is on Azure. So let me click on database engine. Important thing is the way how you would be connecting. So if I take you to the portal on my database itself, let me go to my database overview tab. I've got my connection strings. So if you click on show database connection strings right over here, let me do that. Whether you're doing it for regular ADO.NET or MVC, you got your connection string, Java database connectivity, OLEDB, ODBC, PHP, Go. You've got the connection strings for all these famous options. Important thing to notice that this is my GTLDB SVR09. The suffix is always database.windows.net. It is utilizing port number 1433 with the user ID password. So let's say I'm on my VM. I'm clicking on GTLDB svr09.database.windows.net, looking for SQL Server authentication. Let me have my username and password listed down there. Well, since this is my Southeast Asia data center, the machine's hosted over there, and this is having a different public IP address, I'll be seeing the same exception over here. When I'm trying to connect, it is telling me that your client IP address doesn't have access to this server. So important thing is, this is the client IP which is in question. One, I can copy that and add it to my server firewalls just the way I did previously. Or if you have SQL Server 2014 or later on Management Studio, it gives you the flexibility. I can sign in right over here, and right from there, I'll be able to add to my firewall exception rules. So let me click on sign in. It will open me the Microsoft login area. For this one, SQL Server 2014 or later edition of SSMS is required. Let me go, I'm sorry, I'm not gonna do this with my corporate credentials, the one which I created today. So that was Kuldeep AZ-900, July 2020. And let me have my password, which I created today with this promotional subscription. I hope that's the correct one. Yep. Now, once it will successfully sign me in, I can pretty much add my client IP or an entire range right across from there. Well, the moment I do that, technically it is creating a server firewall rule and connecting to my SQL Azure database on my on-prem SQL Server Management Studio. And there we are. If I'm connected to the server, let's see, I've got all these databases listed. Doesn't matter whether they are with the dedicated compute or whether one of them belongs to a SQL Elastic pool. That's only for performance and costing perspective. How they will be performing in terms of utilizing them functionality wise, pretty much the same. If I talk about the same thing in there, if I go back to my firewall rules, you will notice one of the IP address is automatically added, and that is something we did from SQL Server Management Studio right across in there. So that was one thing which was talking about my databases, guys. And as far as people talks about, hey, can I create a database right from here? Well, absolutely yes. So let's say I'm clicking over here. Let me go on new database. I can always do that. You want to do it from scripts, you can always do it from there as well. So let's say if I would like to go for a new query, or let's go and have a new query created. So let me have a new query window. So you want to do it from wizard, you want to do it from queries, it's all up to you. You can always do that. So let's take an example. It's working up. And if you're saying create database, the name of the database, let's call it GTL test DB01 on Azure, whatever you'd like to name it, I'm executing that. So essentially I'm creating one more database, this time from SQL Server Management Studio over to Azure. Question: what will be the compute, whether it's going to be dedicated or whether it's going to be elastic pool? So by default, it's going to be dedicated. The default SKU will be added to that. Of course, you can customize those parameters while creating that using script right over there. So that was one small example, which was talking about how can we have a SQL database, our RDBMS database created right in here, and how can we start working across. Okay, so important thing, the credentials, what you specified, that's correct. They are at the SQL Server level. More importantly, if I'm on my portal over here at the server, you would like to enable your Active Directory admin, or you would like to go for ADFS configuration in a hybrid mode. You would like to configure your single sign-on using Azure Active Directory. You can always do all those things associated in here at the server level. That's fine. That was one thing which was talking about software as a service component form of your SQL Azure database. Well, sometimes the people says, hey, that's great, but what if I've got my on-prem SQL Server VM and I'd like to have the same thing on the Azure? So one thing which we always recommend, great, we can do that. The easiest way is migrate your on-prem VM to Azure Cloud, one thing, or if you're doing it from scratch and you still want infrastructure as a service type of SQL Server over the cloud, you can always do that. For this one, I'm talking about the SQL Server right over here. If you'll see, we've got multiple options. And one of the important thing is if you go to your Azure Sql and you click on your Azure Sql right across in there, and you see all these databases, SQL servers listed, but what if I want a SQL Server VM? I'm talking about my SQL Server virtual machine. So right across in here, I talk about my SQL Virtual Machines, another component of my Azure native services. When I click over here, that's completely different. In this case, we are going to create a virtual machine which will be having an operating system, SQL Server installed on top of it, just like your on-prem experience. The only difference is this time it's running over Azure. So when you click add over here, that's going to take you to create your SQL machines and what kind of options you want to have. You'd like to create the databases or elastic pool or a complete database server. You'd like to go for a managed instance, which would be managed by yourself in there, or you're doing it everything from you would be responsible of all these things. I want this virtual machine on top of it. I'll be having SQL Server 2019 Enterprise Edition, and you click on create, and it's like an infrastructure as a service VM. So you'll see that it's just like the virtual machine, what you were creating. The image is this time is different, Windows Server 2019 with SQL Server 2019 Enterprise. So can you have it just like your on-prem over the cloud? Absolutely yes, but that will go in infrastructure as a service category. Whereas When someone says SQL Server or SQL databases or Azure Sql, we are talking about software as a service component. Okay, so that's one thing what we have in here. They also have something called as an Azure Marketplace. It's really fantastic to have these kind of informations down there and to easily recognize them. Whenever I'm searching anything, let's say I'm doing something related to SQL Server, what is important under services, whatever I'm getting, these are my Azure native services managed by Microsoft directly. And these are also managed by Microsoft, but they were essentially developed by the ISVs. If you see the marketplace over here, you see all these options coming up down there, and these were the templates which were originally built by the independent software vendors, sent them to Microsoft for further testing. Once all the verifications done, everything's good in terms of performance, availability, parameters, and all, they'll be able to publish it to Azure Marketplace where other people can start utilizing those templates as well. So I've got thousands of Azure Marketplace components down there when it talks about the product listings developed by the independent software vendors down there. Okay, so that was our modules down there. The next lesson is talking about the Azure Identity Solution. Having said that, what is my Azure Identity Solutions and Analytics Solutions down there? Azure is providing you multiple analytics tools, whether it's your SQL data warehouse that's been renamed as Azure Synapse Analytics, whether it is your Azure HD Insight clusters, that's my Hadoop Insight clusters, fully managed on Azure. Whether it's your Azure Data Lake Analytics, if you'd like to have your big data analysis on top of that, you'd like to have some machine learning and artificial intelligence capabilities inbuilt, you can always do that. How does that actually work as far as the artificial intelligence goes up in there? Microsoft provides you the Azure Machine Learning Services, which are excellent to perform your artificial intelligence algorithms, predictive analysis, where you have some training data sets, you'd like to have some data cleansings and all that, algorithms, regressions, algorithms put on top of that. So Azure Machine Learning Studio will help you do the same thing. Also, this is not an AI course over here, but just for a quick information, pretty much an information like level of knowledge down there, let me show you some of the details down there. So I'd like to go for my Azure ML.net. That's my Azure Machine Learning Studio. You can pretty much go over there, you sign in, you start creating your experiments and start working right across. Since this is the account which I created today, which doesn't have anything over here, let me go back with my corporate credentials real quick. So there I should be. There I am. Let me go to my Azure ML.net. That's my Azure Machine Learning.net. I'm signing in with my corporate credentials over here, which will help me taking to my Azure Machine Learning Studio, and I'll be able to show you a couple of things down there. So that's my Azure ML. Let me go to my Machine Learning Studio, or maybe I can directly go right from there. That's the documentation. Let me directly go from there, studio.azureml.net. And that will take me to my Azure Machine Learning Studio, which is a collaborative drag and drop visual workspace where you can start working on your AI datasets and algorithms for predictive analysis, of course. So let it get login once. And let me show you the same. It's opening up. Right, taking a little bit longer than expected. That's okay. All right, it is opening up. All right, let's take some time. I'll come back on this and explain you this brief interface of Azure Machine Learning Studio. All right, it's almost loaded. Looks like I was about to switch. That's okay. So you can see that I've got some projects, I've got some experiments, some of the web services which I've published, I've got my own data set, some of the trained models and all. So important thing to note is whatever you'd like to see, for example, if I'd like to see the income class prediction algorithm using regression or any other techniques down there, when I open that, it's going to show you the workspace where you can start to drag and drop things, add data sets, split it into training versus and all. So instead of predictive experiment, let me go to my training experiment real quick. And if you take a look on my training experiment, I can see my data sets coming up in form of CSV files. I'm cleaning some of the missing data. So data cleansing, data transformations happening. I'm selecting some records from the data sets. I can have my column selectors. So it's like a no code written Azure Machine Learning Studio. Of course, I can have my Jupyter notebooks embedded into that. I can have my R scripts or Python scripts over there, some of the TensorFlow components. Here I can have my R scripts associated. And then I have my boosted decision maker algorithm. I've got a train model, score model. I've got to evaluate that. And once all these things comes up, once I submit and pretty much process that, I'll have my predictive experiment, which can talk about based on the algorithms and data sets, can start predicting results associated to this. So of course, there is a separate 5 days program for Azure Artificial Intelligence down there for machine learnings and all. But for talking about Azure capabilities, yes, we do have Azure artificial intelligence capabilities on top of Azure's down there. We have some serverless compute options as well. And that is really great because we've got some consumption plan options down there. For example, I've got my Azure functions, I've got my Azure logic apps, my Azure event grids. I will try to give you some of these demonstrations today if time permits, once we are done up with the web apps, and we'll understand what's the compute versus a serverless compute platform, and how does it process the apps and options down there. We'll come back to this workspace down there. At this moment, if I would like to explore some of the DevOps along with my Azure application services, that can help us creating and building Azure web apps on the go, and our developers can pretty much do that. It's like a platform as a service compute down there where we can host it over Microsoft application services. It supports multiple languages and frameworks down there. If you can globally scale it with high availability, scaling is not a problem. Security and compliance is embedded in there. You can have your Visual Studio integrations and other IDE integrations as well if you directly want to get them published from there. Let's take an example for that. I've got a walkthrough of creating a web app. Let's just do that. So I'm in here. Let me get back to my portal real quick. And this time, I'd like to talk about my application services. So let's go for Azure App Services. Let's go for app services down there. And I'd like to create one. So let's do that from the portal. No need to say that. We can do it from Azure Bash Shell and Azure PowerShell as well, in terms of provisioning that resource. So let's go ahead over here. I'm selecting my resource group where I would be placing this web application. I need to specify the name. So let's call it GTL Web Application 75. Just wants to make sure this is unique. The suffix is going to be .azurewebsites.net over here. And it is important that how you'd like to publish it. Do you want to do it based on your code, or do you want to do it based on your Docker repository where I can fetch from the latest build down there? Let me do it from code. And as I told you, it supports multiple frameworks and runtime stack, whether it's your .NET Core, whether it's your standard ASP.NET or Java versions, Node, PHP, Python, Ruby on Rails. I've got all these covered. Let's take an example of an ASP.NET application, for example. Since it's ASP.NET, Windows is going to be my hosting platform, okay? where I'd like to make it available. Let's do it at East US, my nearest region down there. Uh, then I've got my app service plan, and this is the one which will decide what is going to be the associated costing, compute, availability, and all those things with this one, what features are supported and not. So it is important to understand. Currently, I've got 100 Azure compute units for this app service with 1.75 gig of memory. Let me change size and explain you the difference between those. If I go on my dev test F1 plan, which is absolutely free, you don't need to pay anything to have your F1 layer applications or web apps down there. But it is a 1 gig memory, it is a shared infrastructure, and it only provides you 60 minutes a day compute. That's it. And you won't be able to access it more than that. What if I go to my D1 on my dev test? It is 1 gig. It is still shared infrastructure, 240 minutes over here. Estimated cost is 9.49 USD. And it also supports custom domains. So whatever your application.azurewebsites.net, the URL comes up, you can replace it with your own custom domain down there. What if I go with my B1 plan? I've got these options. I've got scalability as well. I can manually scale that up. If I go to for my production workloads, let's say my P2V2 420 ACU 7 gig of memory, this is a compute equivalent. This is the costing, and it provides me all these supports over here, including traffic managers and all. So you will notice that the SKUs are really important to understand that what kind of flexibilities does it provide in terms of features, computes, and availability. Well, let me click on apply. I'm selecting this basic B1. Let me click on review and create. And I'll simply create that. Let me just do this. So I'm creating this web app. It is running these final validation checks. And once it is completed, the name is GTL web app 75 dot azurewebsites.net. That's the suffix which will be there. Let me click on create. So this Azure web app will get created and will be hosted, and we'll be able to browse it the way we want. So let's just do that. It is working up. All right, it is submitted for the deployment. In the meanwhile, guys, if you still remember, I deployed this virtual machine this morning and I enabled the web server role. So you can see I have my IIS over here. Now, one thing now is my developers can start developing a web application, deploy it to the IIS of this particular virtual machine, which we are seeing right over here. It's already on a public IP, map it to a custom domain with a net address translation, a one-to-one net, and then start browsing it. It's as cool as it can be. But what if I want to upscale that? In that case, I have to change the memory compute storage for my virtual machine, which I can always do that. What if I want to make it highly available? I have to make it at the VM level, more resources, more costing. If the question only comes up deploying your web app right over there, well, why not you're using the Azure App Services where all these platform level things, hosting servers, compute, and everything is managed by Microsoft. You just focus on what you do the best, develop the app and deploy it over Azure. So you can always do that right across in here. Let's take an example. My web app deployment is complete. Now let's see the by default behavior and then customize it a little. So I'm in here. This is my URL. Let me click on top of it. And just like in an on-prem cases, it gives you the simple IIS page that your web app is ready. It's also telling you that your app is up and running. This is my default page, which is giving me things like that. Now you want to develop it using Node.js, Ruby, Python, Java, PHP, .NET Core, ASP.NET. It's all up to you depending on what code and framework and runtime you select down there. Well, this is the by default app which is up and running. I would like to make some changes. Being an Azure developer, I'd like to do some changes over there. So let's go to one of my on-prem virtual machine. I'm opening up my Visual Studio. Well, that's for Dynamics 365, but doesn't really matter because I can use it for any kind of development right across in there. Okay, uh, let's go ahead over here. I'd like to create a new project. In this case, it's going to be a new website. Let's say I want to do it from scratch. It's going to be my ASP.NET MT website, whatever framework you'd like to list, that's all up to us. Let me click OK. I'm creating this empty web application down there. All right, now let me see my solution explorer. Give me just a second. There we are. It is completely blank. The only thing I'm doing over here, of course, I'll be extending that a little, but at this moment, let me click on add. I'd like to go and add a simple web form, which is just printing me a small message like welcome to my web app or anything. And then I'll show you how do we extend it if we need database connectivities or anything like that. So let's go in here. And that is as simple as that. It's pointing me to a heading 1, which says, welcome to my Azure web app. That's it. Well, I would like to see that locally first. How does it look if I debug that locally on my IIS Express? Let me just do that. It says the validation's complete. I should be seeing that on my local IIS, running that on my local browser under localhost. So it's like any regular thing. Once again, guys, because it's just a demonstration, I'm not following the full best practices, creating a DevOps project, connecting to a DevOps server or Visual Studio Team Services or GitHub, making those branches and all that thing. It's just a quick demonstration, starting it from scratch and deploying it to Azure. So let's say this is what my web app currently looks like. Let me close it. I'm pretty much good with this one. What next am I doing in here? I can export it to a zip, deploy it using CLI. I can do it multiple ways. So let me show you a couple of those. At present, let me open this one, or rather, let me go for a private mode in private browsing. And I'm looking for portal.azure.com. I'll be logging in with the same credentials. Well, I can download the app, but that's okay. Let me go to the website directly. That was my AZ-900, July 2020. Let me go in here. All right, we are logging into our Azure portal. And one thing which I'll be doing and showing you the next step, let's just say I just developed a sample web app. Now I need to deploy it to Azure. So let me go to my web application real quick, the one which I just provisioned. And over here, we already tested, it's accessible on that URL. Currently, we can access that. It says your web application's up and running. The next segment I'm doing over here is you see a button over here which says Get Published Profile. Let me click over here. Essentially what it's going to do, it will download the publish settings. Let me save it. And let me show you, before I apply that, let me show you that what it looks like and what does all these things means over there. So let me open that with Notepad just for display purposes. Let me increase the font a little bit. And I'll explain you some of the parameters and you'll understand what exactly these are. So let's see. This is my published profile. And this is for this particular web app. I've got a web deploy as the method of deployment. The publish method is MS Web Deploy. This is the publish URL. That's the System Center Configuration Manager running on the back end of Azure services, which is taking care of all the deployments coming in. I will be deploying on this particular web app. I've got the username passwords generated in a secure string over here for the MS Deploy publish method. My destination URL after the publish is successful is going to be this, which currently is pointing to my web application. Do I have any SQL Server database connection string? As of yet, nothing. Do I have any MySQL connection string? Nothing as of yet. I've got some control panel links over there. It's a website. You see the publish profile, then you have your FTP, www root. So you can see that where using which URLs, which credentials it's going to publish. Now we understand what is a web app publish profile or an Azure App Services publish profile. The next thing we are doing over here, let me go to my Visual Studio. This is my website. I'd like to publish it. So the moment I do that, let me click on Publish Web App, and that will open me the publish page. It's really important. I can directly log into Azure Web Apps over here. I can create a web app on the fly directly from Visual Studio. But since I've already created that, let me import a published profile. Let me browse. And this is the one which I just downloaded. Let me open that. It will automatically bring up all those parameters. And now we understand what all these things means. What I'm going to do now is let me validate the connection. I should be seeing a green check over here that I am good to proceed. I'm good to publish this. And then we can pretty much click on publish, and all your source from Visual Studio will get published to Azure, and we'll see an in-portal editor as well. So let me click on publish. So the moment I do, it will start building. The build will successful. It will start publishing, creating the ACLs, that's the access control list, and start working accordingly. So publish is succeeded. Having said that, let me go in here. Where was my URL? There it is. And now if you take a look, it's showing you welcome to my Azure web app. An important thing is this is not on my local host or anywhere. So if I put that for everyone in this meeting, let me have this URL. If you guys can click, you should see exactly the same thing as I'm seeing over here, because that's what I deployed over the web app. Can you confirm you're able to access this web app, which I recently provisioned and deployed? Great. Well, thank you very much, guys, for the quick confirmation in here. Now, let me do some more changes over here. Another experience being a developer or an Azure solution developer, if I go back to the portal, I've got various options over here. For example, if I would like to do some configurations, I'd like to do some application variables, any kind of connection strings I want to store, just like you were doing it in web.config, I can always do it over here. At the same time, you'd like to implement some authentication authorizations associated with that. You'd like to see the app insights. One of the important areas here, I'm clicking on App Service Editor, which is a in preview feature. Well, the in preview feature also comes up as a private preview or a public preview. So this is a public preview feature, which is available to everyone currently in preview. Let me click over here. That will take me to that deployment endpoint, and I'll be edit that on the fly directly inside the portal. So let's take a look. You can see over here, it's taking me to a production endpoint, the system configurations manager, Azure websites.net /dev/www root, the URL down there. I can have my GitHub created from there. I can have my Git libraries at any point of time. I can have my Git repositories, that's okay. At this point of time, let's say I'm at my default.aspx, and I'd like to say my title is going to be my page 1. And second, I'd like to have a second heading over there, which says updated site. And remember one thing, I'm not doing it from Visual Studio. I'm directly doing it from the portal. Well, all I need to do here is just save it. And if you're doing any code level changes or anything, you might need to build your project again right from there. That's okay. And that's pretty much it. If I refresh it, I just made some changes. The heading, the title comes up as my page. And now I'm seeing my updated site right from here. I can edit it from the portal if I want. Now, let's say I would like to do one more thing real quick. If I go to my development virtual machine over Southeast Asia data center, and this is the one thing which I have, let's say after my heading 1, I would like to have a control down there. Let me go to my toolbox. And well, I can do MVC, entity framework, or Java or anything. Just for demonstration, I'm deploying, I'm doing a simple grid example using traditional ADO.NET, or we can do pretty much any .NET framework applications down there. That's fine. Let my controls get loaded over here. And I'm expecting to add a grid view. Let me just do that. All right, it's working up, loading the package and all. All right, there I am. Let me expand the data and I'm adding a grid view. Let me just do this. And the moment I do that, let me go to design some of the minimal changes, and then I write some piece of code down there. So let me go some of the custom format. Let's go with this one, for example. I'm clicking OK. Let's go to the code behind over here. When my page gets loaded, ideally, I should be following plenty of best practices down there, all those things, but I'm just doing it for the sake of demonstration. Let me include some of the namespaces. I'm gonna say system.data, what I'd like to incur for data sets and all. I'd like to have my system.data.sql client for my SQL connectivity using ADO.NET and all. Important thing, let me go with this one. And let's go with this one. And anything goes wrong, let me have. All right. Now let's try and do some sort of Azure SQL database connectivity to this Azure hosted web app. So all I'm doing over here is I'm doing a SQL connection. Let me just do that right across in here. And I'm going to provide my connection string right over here. Let's go for SQL command down there. I'm going to provide my command followed by the connection parameters down there. Let's go for, let me just do this. I'm filling the adapter with that data set, and then I'm going to say grid view one dot data source. That's going to be my data set, and then I'm going to say a data bind. Well, that's a traditional ASP.NET, ADO.NET connectivity mechanism down there. Let me just specify and have that information right across. All right, that's fine. Just wants to make sure the syntax and everything's correct in here. And let me just have those parameters listed. Okay, first thing first, I need to provide that connection string over here. So if I go back to my portal real quick, and let me click on my database server. Let's go to my Azure SQL, or let's go to my database server. I've created a couple of databases down there. One of them is going to be my database 02, the one which is having some sample data associated. Let's go to the connection strings over there. And what I want is a standard ADO.NET. So let me quickly copy that. And that's okay. Let's go and have it over here. Important thing, the only thing I'm looking to change over here is my password. Rest, everything's fine. Ideally, I know the best practices. It should be on web.config or my configuration properties, but I'm just doing it for presentation purposes, a simple demonstration over there. Let's just have the password listed, the one which I created. And I'm pretty much trying to fill this, just wants to make sure I'm still good at coding. That was 10 years, 12 years down the line. Let me run that locally and make sure it successfully executes. Important thing, the public IP of this PC is already added over here. Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't open the connections down there. Sorry, and I didn't specify the command. My apologies. Let's go select asterisk from saleslt.customer. And that's actually the name of the schema, which I'm specifying in here. Let me open the connection and close the connection. Once it's done, let me close the connection down there. Let me run this. So this is always good when we print that exception, so anything goes wrong, and let's have it captured down there. All right, so I'm running it. Let's have it at localhost, and there we go, guys. You can see that I'm having my web app down there. It is printing me all the details directly coming up from my Azure Sql database. Of course, we can fine tune that. I'm not a very good designer in terms of look and feel and all, but functionality wise, let's just say this is what we have as of now. More important, I'm gonna do a publish. So this time when I'm publishing, I already have the profile imported. There was a question which I was seeing, what level of access user needs to publish a website or a web app? So important thing, you don't need any access down there. You don't even need to be an Azure Portal user. All you require is that publish settings, which we just downloaded. Just download those publish setting files, distribute it to your development team. They'll be importing it to their Visual Studio and done. They don't need to be anyone, any special permissions, nothing. That's why the publish settings are there, because I don't want to create everybody a global administrator down there. Okay, now when we have it over here, let's go on my GTL web app. I'm pretty much publishing on the same source. Let me do that. And this time we are expecting a problem. It is running absolutely fine on my local host, but when I'm over here, bingo, there's going to be a big problem. And if I copy that URL and pretty much paste it for everyone, I want you guys to click on the same web app once again and verify that you're also seeing the same issue in related to the client IP address and all. Okay. Thank you very much, guys. Thanks for confirming that. Now, before I fix it, before I make it up and running, one final question. Let's just say we've got multiple Zoom rooms over here. I've got 468 persons in combined in all the rooms, 39, 67. Okay, so does it mean if you all are browsing the site, does it mean I have to add 467 different public IP addresses to my list? Yep, correct. Because you're just the end user endpoint. That doesn't matter. What is important is my web application is hosted on a server with this public IP address, and that needs to access my database. So only this IP address will be added to the server firewalls. So let me go to my firewall settings one more time and add my, let's call it a dev web app server IP, Azure. Now, let me just do that. Sometimes people say, hey, Kuldeep, that's great, but the web app is hosted on Azure. The SQL Server is also hosted on Azure. How come they are not trusting even the Azure IP addresses? Well, I would say nothing. SQL Server will not trust anything, not even your Azure Virtual Machine. All those IPs you have to add to ensure you are directly, you're pretty much providing access by yourself down there. So let me click on save over here. The moment my firewalls are updated, let me refresh it and we should be seeing the values coming up. So now if you'll refresh the same web app, I should be seeing the heading 1 and I should be seeing my database values coming up from the customers table. Now, the important thing to notice over here that Where did the updated goes? I was also seeing updated over here a heading too, because I did it in the inside Portal app service editor, and when I republished it from Visual Studio, that source was overwritten. That's correct. That source code was overwritten. So this is something you can always do, but always follows your developers best practices when it comes to let's have a single source of changes. That's why we do versioning, code signings, we do the GitHubs, and then DevOps and all those things coming up. Your build and release pipelines comes up on the definitions. Okay, so that was one thing about your web apps and how can we get them connected to the databases if we want to. So that was a very small example. How can we have a web app created and deployed over there? Now, before I explain you these things, since beginning this morning, I was talking about I can do all these things from Azure Portal. I can do it from Azure CLI and PowerShell. I can do it from Azure Cloud Shell using Bash or PowerShell, either one. I can pretty much operate and have some of the management through my mobile app as well. And I can have my Azure REST APIs to be called by your Visual Studio or .NET developers or your supported language developers down there and start calling and creating Azure resources down at the same time. So we can do pretty much all these things from multiple ways. I've got an ARM template, which we would be discussing now. But before we do that, I skipped one of the demonstration in my prior presentation. That was Azure Function Apps, and that was talking about the serverless compute. So let's understand what that is and how it is different from Azure App Services. Although that is a part of Azure App Services, but considered differently because it can be serverless, if it can be on the hosting or consumption plan. So let's go over there. I'm back to my Azure portal here. And this time, let me create one more Azure resource. That's going to be my function app. So very first thing first, what is a function app? Ideally, we are discussing that in much more detail in the development or architecture or data courses down there. But here for a quick overview, you must be remembering being the developers or your technical folks down there or your technical architects down there, create some of your microservices, WCF services, web services, various reusable code down there, and pretty much that can be utilized in there. What is important, the function app can act as a combination of all those small executable units, also known as some of the microservices, get them built, which will be triggered based on an event, and that can run independently in a serverless compute environment. How does that work? Let's take an example. If I click on a function app, I'd like to place it on one of my resource group, would like to call it GTL function app 76, just wants to make sure the name's unique in here. And let's have it by code, like to go with .NET Core version 3.1. Would like to place it on my East US 2 as the region. Now the important thing comes up on the hosting tab, and this will decide what kind of behavior it's going to apply. One, are you going to go on a consumption plan, which is the serverless? What does it mean? Your function app will be up and running. You will only be paying for the number of calls you're making to the function, irrespective of it's running 24/7. And that too is very minimal. I would say 550,000 calls per month are absolutely free. And if I'm buying more 500,000 calls down there, it's costing me less than 10 cents in terms of pricing. So that's very efficient, which is running on a serverless compute. When I say an app service plan, this time this will be equals to a web app. Web app is your presentation layer for the end users and all. This is your working up and managing your microservices functionality, kind of a micro functionality running on the cloud. But this is on a dedicated compute if I'm going in an app service plan. If it is serverless, would be a consumption based. If you want to make premium, that is also on serverless, but will give you some of the compute running guarantees for how many minutes it will keep on running, longer limits down there. Let me go with the default one, the serverless consumption plan. I'm clicking on review and create. And let me get this one created. I'm submitting this for deployment. Let me click on create. I just created an Azure function app, which will have multiple functions based on the triggers, whether it's a Azure Blob trigger, a Event Hub trigger, an IoT trigger, an HTTP trigger, a timer trigger. Based on any trigger you want to execute some piece of code down there and have some things processed, we can always do that. So let's have it. It's currently deploying. An important thing is I submitted that on a consumption serverless execution plan down there. So let's have it here, guys. It's working up. Almost deployed. Let me go to my function apps. And I should be seeing it over here. That's my area where I should be seeing those values coming up. All right, it is deploying currently. Let this one, all right, the deployment is succeeded. Let me click on the function app which I created. And currently, if you see, it's on the serverless execution. When I click on the functions, I see nothing. We don't have any functions over here. You can develop them locally using any of your IDE, just like Visual Studio, for example, or let me click add. I want to do it and I want to develop them using in portal experience. So what kind of triggers you want? HTTP trigger, a timer trigger, Azure Queue, Service Bus, Blob, Cosmos DB, SendGrid, a third-party service, any kind of Azure Event Grid, anything. For example, if I say an HTTP trigger, let's say, and that would be my GTL function 01 HTTP demo, the authorization levels function itself, you can have anonymous or that's fine. Let me create that function once. The moment you do, it's going to give you a sample piece of code, which you can start utilizing by writing the code over there and start working at the same time. So let's have a look. First thing first, it's talking about the execution count, successful execution, some of the matrices down there, which can help us analyze how that's behaving, how that's working in terms of monitoring. Let me click on get function URL. This is the function URL where you can pretty much call it, okay? And if you take a look over here, you got your default and the master key as well. That's fine. Let me click OK. I'm clicking on code and test. This is my in portal code writing experience. Let me just do that. All right, it's working up. Let this one gets open. Taking a little longer than expected. Okay, let it be in here. In the meanwhile, let me close these unused tags from here. Okay, there we are. And it should be loading the code over here. That's fine. You can see the logs coming up. So that's the sample code, which is coming up as part of that. You can include your packages, have your custom code written over there. At present, it is accepting a name parameter from the query string. You can see that. And then it's printing that particular one. If it is successfully triggered, hello by the name, and then it says it is successfully triggered. The log currently says it is connected. At this moment, if you click on get function URL, and this is the function URL, if you copy, let me paste it over here, and you can pretty much have the function accessible right from there. At the same time, If I would like to test it, let me click on test run, and on the function parameter, let me call John Doe being my name over here, and I'm passing that as the query parameter. Let me run this. The moment you do that, or any changes you do, whether it's compiled any error, now it's telling you, hello, John Doe, the HTTP triggered function executed successfully. Everything is currently logged over here because that's where my code is doing. I'm calling the iLogger down there and I'm logging that particular information as well. So depending on what type of trigger, this is an HTTP trigger. It could be a timer trigger on a scheduled time over there on a defined schedule. It could be your Azure Blob related trigger, a event grid trigger, a Cosmos DB trigger, anything you'd like to process using the function app. And we are doing based on consumption. So there is no dedicated compute for this. It's running on the shared infrastructure, and we are only getting paid by the number of calls. By default, 50,000 calls are absolutely free, and the next 5,000 is going to cost us somewhere around 10 cents down there. So that was one example when we talk about function app. Important thing to notice, in case of function apps, what we created, I didn't invoke any app service plan. In case of my web apps, let me go to my web apps. So that's my function app. This is my web application. And I have an application service plan down there. So if you click and you'd like to scale it up or down, you click on the app service plan and you can pretty much scale it up. Come over here, select a different app service plan, or you can scale it down to a lower layer at the same time. So that's one thing which talks about these app services and all. One more thing I'd like to show, because we are on the web application, we would be discussing that in applications or Azure monitoring as well. With these app services, we've got our application insights as well. And that's really great, not because of monitoring functionalities and all. It's also great being your developers efficiently monitoring and having some preemptive information about your web app's behavior. So if you take a look of the web applications data, if you see that, I would barely see anything because this is a very simple web app. I just deployed it like 20 minutes before or 10 minutes before. So I'm not expecting to see a lot of data over here, but that's giving me the failed request, the average response time, number of requests, the availability concern. You would like to see anything on the application map, how your application's working, and you'll see if there are some components to display. So this is the application which is connecting to a Sql database down there. There are two calls. The 7 millisecond is the latency I'm seeing, and I'm not seeing a lot of information because very few details are provided in here. At the same, if I show you the same thing to one of my corporate listed apps, let me go to my corporate Azure portal. I'm going to my app services. We've got plenty of them. One of them is one of our production apps, which is hosted on top of Azure with custom domains and all. So how does that actually work? If someone's browsing our site, that's the custom domain. And if someone's clicking on gtechlearn.azurewebsites.net, that is also are the same page. So it is my app services, and I've enabled the custom domain mapping. So it's working right across in here. How? Let's take a look. If I go to my custom domains, and you will notice we've embedded our custom domains by C labs and all those things over there. Next in the segment is I've also enabled the SSL. Now, depending on whether custom domain or SSL support is there or not, that depends on your application service plan. At the same time, someone clicks up on courses, anything, we are seeing that particular information, related technologies and all, but that is coming from somewhere on the database, might be somewhere on a file services, might be somewhere from a WCF service or anything. We'll see that one up in here. So important thing, when someone clicks over here, that's not a static website, first of all, that's a dynamic website coming up with query strings and all those informations coming up. At the same time, someone's click on the list of events, registering anything from there, that's fine. Now let's understand the application insights for this one. So if I click on application insights over here, let me see the application insights data. In the meanwhile, it is loading. Let me do it for 30 days. Question from Darren, will we be testing on all these labs walkthroughs? The answer is yes. So by end of the day today, once you'll fill up your evals and surveys, the team will be sending you your respective Azure passes. You can always activate them, redeem them, and do the hands-on labs. I'll also be sharing you the link of updated hands-on labs from GitHub repositories. So I'll ensure we are absolutely good to go before we end the session today. All right, thank you. So let's take a look over here, guys. You can see I've got 1.58K failed requests over here. I've got my average response time quite high since we integrate some of the payment gateways and all. The server request, how many requests, and it's not highly available because it's already providing 99.99% of availability. So we were kind of good in terms of availability metrics down there. If I show you the application map, for example, and instead of last hour, let me do it for last 30 days. Let me click on apply. And now you see how it is pretty much working down here. It is updating in the meanwhile. That's our application down there. And I've got some of the calls to dynamics.com. That's our enterprise CRM ERP server down there, from where it is fetching all those informations using function apps. And this is 107 milliseconds, which is quite okay. The more problem comes up with when we are logging in to Microsoft SSO, single sign-on functionality, 253 milliseconds on an average. And our payment gateway is very slower when we are doing it with the Stripe integration. So being a developer, I'm able to see performance-wise the way I would like to see something like this or something like this. More importantly, how the error comes up 0.4%. I was seeing some status codes 500 or 133 things down there. At the same point of time, I can see which page is causing more problems. So if you take a look on the failures over here, you're going to see multiple failures. There are 246 failures in last 24 hours in the course details page. And when I do so, there are 500 error code exceptions. There are 7 Stripe exceptions down there. If you'd like to see them, click over there and it will take you to the drill down to the exact page, which page was causing issue and what exactly the problem was. So it's really great from a developer's perspective as well to see your application preemptively, that how it's behaving, especially on the errors in terms of performance, the stress testing and all. So that's one thing which is really helpful when we talk about the application insights related across in there. Okay, now when we come up over here, when we talk about the web applications, we can make them highly available. We can have Azure traffic managers and multiple things listed to them. So the next concept in the segment talks about we deployed plenty of resources. We did it using the Azure Portal. Some of them we did it using the Bash shell or the PowerShell. Now what's important, I can always do them from the ARM templates as well. How does that work? How does it look like? Well, let's take an example. So this time, let's take an example over here. I'm actually creating a virtual machine, for example, or a web app or a function app, whatsoever, any kind of Azure resource. Let me click on App Services. I'm clicking on Add. I'm creating a web application. That would be on this particular resource group. The name is GTL Web App 932, just wants to make it unique. That'll be based on ASP.NET, for example, putting it up on Central US with the default plan. Let me click on Review. So it is running the final validations. The moment it does, let's take a look over here. I'm seeing an option for download a template for automation. Let me click on that. The moment I do, I would like to explain you something. For example, I've got some of the parameters over here. I've got some of the resources down there. So there would be 3 different resources: a web app, there would be a hosting plan, an app service plan, there would be an application insights. And I've got 15 different parameters. What is the subscription I'm using? The name, the location, the hosting environment, the hosting plan name, all those details coming up right from here. Now, important thing to notice, if I download them, it will download them as zip files. Two files will primarily be there, a template file and a parameter file. So how does that work? Let's take a look. I'm opening up that zip file and let me bring up over here. I've got a template file, which is JSON. I've also got a parameters file, which is also JSON. All right. Now, it is important that at any given point of time, I can download them as my ARM templates and deploy them later on. I can add them to library, or I can deploy any ARM template right from there. You just copy paste your JSON code, your ARM template code. And once you click on deploy, let's see how does it work. Important thing, it is a custom deployment. Okay. And I did it with all these values coming up. You can see build on your own template editor where you can start copying and pasting all that information across, and we can pretty much see the values coming up from there. So if you would like to load a file, and let's say I have it on my downloads, that was the template. Let me extract it. Just wants to do it right over here. Let me go to my downloads real quick. That was the one. And let me go just JSON file as of now. So when you do the JSON file, I'm just seeing the JSON file associated over here. I don't have any parameters as of now. Once you're trying to save it, that's telling you that you've got all these parameters, and these parameter files either needs to be provided to you, or you can have it from your parameters files. So when you click on edit parameters, that's the where I can pretty much have my parameters files loaded. Let me get my parameters over here. And now when I click on save, you will see those parameters are automatically filled, and you provide these essential informations, whatever your hosting environment, all those details, and you submit that, and you're absolutely good. You can do it from the deployment right across. And this is not only for your websites or web services or anything. For example, if I'm creating a virtual machine down there, let me go to my Azure Virtual Machines. In the list of VMs, I'm adding a VM right over here. And let's say this time I'm doing it for North America Resource Group. Want to call it GTL host 01, technically using the same name, but I can do that because it's on a different resource group. It doesn't have to be globally unique. So let me go with my specifications over here, have my details listed. The user ID password, I'm sorry, didn't match. Should be good. All right. And when I say review and create, then only you'll see a download a template for automation. That's the ARM template, which you can always deploy right from here. So when you do so, it's all up to us. You do that, you add it to library, you can include the parameters, you can download the zip file, or you can deploy it right from here. So the moment you click on deploy, you pretty much select your templates and all those values, whatever template you have, or you want to do it from GitHub, for example. Let's say GitHub is giving us lots of templates down there. I would like to create an application gateway. When I select that template, automatically you will see the JSON files appearing on the virtual network and all those things. So ARM is a great way for automation. And to be very honest, when we talk about large scale organizations, when we have complex tasks which needs to be sequenced together, resource deployment, provisioning, maintenance, and all, we prefer ARM templates to be used in there. And more efficiently, Azure is also having something called as Azure Blueprints, which works on top of your ARM templates, simplifying the need of manageability of those ARM templates and all. So that's really great when we talk about the availability of ARM templates in our Azure cycle down there. Important thing, I can create a VM using Azure CLI or any resource using Azure CLI, whether it's a web app or anything. I can provision any virtual machine. I can create a resource group. I can create a web app or every different thing using Azure CLIs at the same point of time. So that was one thing what we have on the second module, which talks about a couple of Azure services. We haven't discussed even 1% of the total Azure services in this course, but being the beginners, some of the most commonly used services which you'd be working, we had some of these walkthroughs created in here, which you'll be able to practice with your Azure passes and with your own subscriptions or test subscriptions down there. We have got a third module over here, which is talking about some of the security and compliance consideration, which needs to be in there. Now, before we start working with this very third module, guys, let's take a quick 15 minutes over here for your tea and coffee. And once we are done with that, we'll resume right from the same slide, talking about module number 3 and some more demonstrations over Azure. Thank you very much, guys. I should see you at, this is 2:25 Eastern. Let's resume the class at 2:40 Eastern and we'll start right from here. Make sure I'm recording. Yes, I am. Okay, so in this module, we would be talking about something in networking, the Azure Identity Services, the security tools, some of the governance and compliance monitoring down there. So let's talk about some of our network security associations down there. When we talk about Azure, I've got my data, which is further generated by the application, and that's running on top of a compute, which is accessible inside a network. We can have our perimeter access to that. We can have our demilitarized zone over there, DMZ servers and all. And then on top of it, my identity and access management works. Having said that, the next level is my physical security, a physical access to the physical data center and servers down there, a layered approach of securing all your computer systems when we talk about that. So when we talk about how do we associate and start working with that, with the very first module, we were talking about a shared responsibility model. So when I talk about a shared responsibility model or a shared security, so in case of on-prem infrastructure, platform, or software as a service components, that slide pretty much talks about the same thing, who's responsible for what. In on-prem, pretty much the customer is responsible for anything, whether it is your physical data center access, your physical network, your physical host, your host operating system, your network controls, your applications, identity account, client endpoint, and all the data governance and compliance, customers fully responsible. In case of infrastructure as a service, Microsoft is responsible for your three compute down there, which is the physical accessibility of host, network, and the data center. On top of it, you'll be responsible to have all those things implemented, network controls, you'll be having full control over there. In platform as a service, Microsoft's responsible up till here, and then there are some shared responsibility between both, and how you're providing access, how you're distributing your endpoints and all, that's pretty much completely comes to the customer. At the same point of time, this is how my software as a service model works up. So we understand in cloud scenarios, we follow a shared responsibility approach where some of the things the customers pretty much having that responsibility on completely on us. In some cases, it's the cloud provider. In some cases, we both work tightly to implement those policies out there. At the same time, we've got our Azure firewalls. Just like you've got your physical firewalls, you might have a virtual firewall appliance. How does the Azure firewalls actually works? It's quite easy. You can always deploy your firewall just as another resource over to Azure. So if I go in here, let me click on my Azure firewall. And I'm clicking on the firewalls across in there. Let me create a firewall. So I'm provisioning an Azure firewall from the portal. I can do it from CLI as well. Let me put it on my resource group and want to call it AZ Firewall 01, wherever I would like to deploy that. So let's go on my East US and which virtual network it's going to be the part of. So let me select an existing one, the one which I created, or you can have the different one provided you must have the matching subnet associated. Let me create a new network. I'm gonna say GTL AZ VNet 01 with firewall configuration. And down here, I'm gonna specify if I would like to use any public IP address to be accessible or add a new public IP. So let's call it my AZ Firewall public IP. Let me click OK. That will be created as a new resource down there. And now I'm creating this firewall. So let's see what I missed. Okay, I did specify the value. So let's go for 10.3.0.0/16 is the one which I would like to create. And let's go for 10.3.0.0/16, the subnet type, whatever I would like to provide, how many addresses, usable addresses would be in there. Let me review and create. Just wants to make sure my very valid validation is succeeded. I can create a firewall and start configuring that. Well, the module doesn't talk about how do we create a firewall. It talks about as part of security, Azure does provides you the firewall. It also provides you the network security groups where you can have your inbound and outbound rules to filter by source, by destination IP, by source IP, by destination port, by source port, and the protocols listed, the 5-tuple general network filterings down there. How does it work in there? Any network whatsoever. If I go on virtual networks down there, let me click on the VNets. Let me open any of my VNet listed here. And then you take a look on the NSGs. So when I click on the virtual network, let's go to the address space. You will see the address is associated. What subnet are we providing in here? At the same point, do we have any firewall associated with this one? No, but with the new deployment, we'll be having a firewall with that virtual network. Do you want to configure any peerings over there, a global VNet peerings between one virtual network to another? We generally do that in AZ-900 for the architecture scores down there. At the same point of time, you can talk about Azure Firewalls with network security groups. You can have your perimeter layer and your networking layer created to provide additional security down there. We just created a firewall associations in here. Now it talks about identity and access management. Now this is really important that authentication and authorization are two different processes. Authentication always comes first, which simply talks about whether you are an authenticated user or not. And once you are an authenticated user, what you will be able to do and what not comes up as authorization, which is controlled via Azure Active Directory and roles over there. So for this one, let me take you to my Azure portal down here. And I'm talking about my Active Directory. So when I click on my Azure Active Directory, the very first thing comes up that what kind of environment are we in? Are we on a public cloud environment? All of our resources are completely cloud, or are we on a hybrid cloud scenario where some of our resources are in the cloud, some of our resources are on our local on-prem in deployment or data centers down there. So what is really important in here that there is a component called Azure AD Connect down here. Now, if you see this Azure AD Connect, what it is, if you have your on-prem Active Directory and you would like to synchronize that with your Azure Active Directory, you can download and install your Azure AD Connect and configure it. It's quite simple. You click over here, you download the Azure AD Connect and you install it on one of your edge servers or one of your DMZ servers down there. So it is having complete synchronizations with your Azure Active Directory. On this test one, we don't have it, but just to show you, if I go back to my corporate credentials over here, give me a second. There I am. Let me go to my Azure Active Directory right over here. And there you will notice in our case, since we are in hybrid cloud situation, our Azure AD Connect is configured and installed, currently enabled. The last synchronization was less than an hour ago, and I'm seeing some sign-ins for the short period of time in there, and we can see multiple options down there. So this would only be required in case we are in a hybrid cloud situation where we would like to synchronize our on-prem Active Directory with Azure Active Directory. At any given point of time, if you would like to enable MFA, multi-factor authentication for additional security down there. So let's go over here and I talk about my MFA options. So when I click on the users, you will see the users listed over here. Currently, I've got only one associated over there. You click on multi-factor authentication. That will take you to have two-factor authentication enabled, whether an additional layer would always be helpful for your single sign-on procedures. So having said that, all you're going to do is select that user and enable the MFA. Important thing to notice, you might want to change some of the service settings area in terms of how MFA will work. There are some exceptions from the IP addresses and all. So let's take an example. It says, I would like to see only the verification code from mobile or hardware token, or I don't want a notification. I want text messages to the phone. This is how I want to authorize a second authentication, a multi-factor authentication down there. An important thing, if I'm saying this as 30 days, for example, or let's say 10 days over here, what does it mean when you will be logging in? This option will give you, if it's a trusted device, it will, for the next 10 days, it will not ask you for additional authentication. You can temporarily disable only if this option is selected. If it's unchecked for enterprise for all the organization, in that case, everybody have to go for an additional layer of authentication with any of your enterprise services, and doesn't matter whether it's a shared, trusted device or not. To show you how does that actually works in there, let's take an example. If someone goes up in here, or any of those options down there, I'm trying to browse one of the URL down there. It's taking me to the login page. Important thing is someone's trying to log in. So let's call it T365 FO23, whatever I'd like to use for demonstration purposes. The moment I do that and I provide the password over here, it is important, I'm sorry. Or let me try doing it by my account over here. So let me have my corporate account listed in there. Let me sign in. And when I do so, you will see that it is sending a code to the given number, because in our case, the multi-factor authentication is enabled down there. And once you specify that, then only you'll be able to work up and start utilizing any of those particular services. Well, this is one thing which talks about having MFA enabled and have some options. All we need to do is apply to the entire organization or do it for individual users, select it and enable the multi-factor authentication for a simple user down there. At the same point of time, I've got my roles listed on the Azure Active Directory as well. So when we talk about pretty much the logs and all those details, when I click on Azure AD right across in there, let's click on the roles and administrators here, guys. So you will notice we already have a couple of roles listed and associated right across in there, which is giving us all these details listed. At the same point of time, we can create custom roles if required. So first thing first, Azure Active Directory is considering your users to be authenticated for the authentication purposes. The second thing is the roles will definitely help in terms of how the users and what kind of access the users will be having once they successfully log in. So that is my authorization purpose. So the authentication and authorization in Microsoft Azure's completely handled by Azure Active Directory. Once again, we can do a lot of things in Azure Active Directory, company brandings and all. So you must be seeing when I'm logging in, it's giving us this gold partner, our support contact number, a custom label, our logos in there. That's directly from Microsoft. That's the Microsoft login online.com. But since it's on GTechLearn.com, we've enabled the custom branding, which can be done right from here on the company branding area. Important thing is you'll be requiring a premium Azure Active Directory plan for that. And then change your theme, customize your theme, and start working with these Azure AD concepts associated to that. So that's a couple of things what we have associated in here. In case of multi-factor authentication, the one which we were understanding and pretty much having a small demonstration of that, we've got the first level authentication at the username password, and then I've got a second level authentication, either a mobile notification or a hardware token or pretty much anything of a text over the phone or a voice call over the phone. A secondary verification what needs to be done before you completely access these services associated to that. So we can have plenty of add-on securities when it comes to Azure down the line. At the same point of time, I've got my Azure Key Vault for enhanced security. Well, what it does, what it pretty much works. So if I go to my Microsoft Azure, everyone, this time I'm talking about an Azure Key Vault, which is really great in terms of a centralized vault system, which can store all of our secrets, all of our certificates, all of our SSL certificates and the keys over there. So let's take an example. If I go on my Azure Key Vault, I'm clicking on the Azure Key Vaults right across in here. I'm adding one, which will help me centrally store all those connection strings, manual secrets, certificates, and all. Let me put it on this particular resource group. The name of the resource group is going to be GTL Azure Key Vault 02. Just wants to make sure it's unique. And important thing, it's globally unique, not on this resource group. So this is again some of the things you might want to try over there, because there would be some questions like what's the unique inside a resource group and what should be unique in globally in terms of those Azure hosted services down there. Well, let me go for standard. I'm not going for premium because premium will enable you to have the hardware supported manage the SSM backed keys over there for the hardware tokens and all. Well, that's fine. Let me review and create. What I'm doing here is I am provisioning an Azure Key Vault over Azure. That will help me storing all my secrets, that will help me storing all my SSL certificates and the keys associated. So it is running those validations over here. Let get successful. All right, validation passed. I'm clicking on create. So I'm provisioning an Azure Key Vault. Once again, added security, you already have some of your passwords, connection strings and all. And today, you guys have seen that I was creating a web app where I was fetching the connection string from a SQL database server, pretty much my SQL Azure database, and putting it on my web app directly. So I was directly exposing that. Well, I don't want to do that in that way. I first want my developers should access that in a secure manner. What does that mean? They will be hitting my Azure Key Vault with a uniquely generated token, and that token will return them a grant access, a read access, whatever access we want to have on those connection strings, and then only they'll be able to utilize that. So let's take an example. My Key Vault is deployed over here. First of all, it's deployed over here. That's the DNS name where it is currently situated. Pricing tiers standard over here. I would like to have some secrets listed. Let's just do that. I would like to click on manual and let me call it my VM password, for example, and that's going to be this one. Important thing to notice, when I specify that, let me just say password, it's optional, whatever. I can have an activation date and an expiration date of the secure secret. Whenever I create that, that will be enabled. So what is important, I have this virtual machine password in a secure string. Let me create that. And I just created a secret. I'm creating one more over here. Let me call it my SQL DB connection string. And importantly, let me go to my Azure portal. I'm going to portal.azure.com. Clicking on this one. I'm sorry, that's not the one I should be. Let me go back. This is the one which is currently signed in for promotional subscription. Let me have it. Now let's go to my SQL, Azure SQL databases. And this time that's going to be my database. So let's go my SQL database. Right over here, I'm talking about database number 2, for example. I've got the connection strings here, and let me copy that. Important thing to notice, I'd like to change it a little bit. So let's have it, and I'll place my password to make it a little realistic down there. All right, so this is my connection string. Right over here, let me put it in a secured manner. And the moment while I'm doing it, let me have and create the secret. So I created a couple of manual secrets over here. I can import my keys over here if I want to. I can also do a SSL certificate import or generate it right from there. That will help me managing all those values in there. Now, what is important? How does an Azure Key Vault makes it more secure right across in there? At the same time, when I click on connection strings, for example, you will see a current version coming up over here. When I click on that, that will generate me a secure URL pointing to my Azure Key Vault. Important thing, if you see that value, this is the actual value which I stored, the connection string, but that's not directly accessible. My developers would be accessing them by this particular URL over there. So you will see it is pointing to my GTL Azure Key Vault by the secrets. And this is the secret I'm talking about. And this is the current version they are pointing to. So they will be hitting my Azure Key Vault. That will return them the secret URL, pretty much the secret value, and they'll be able to use it. So putting up an additional layer of security, we can always have it through our Azure Key Vaults. Another thing, since it's a vault, you can store all your secrets, SSL certificates, keys at the same place. You don't need to look 10 different ways and have all that sensitive information at central vault down there. So one of the examples which talks about how our Azure Key Vault can start working and get those associations. So when it says the Azure Key Vault, it will store your application secrets in a centralized cloud location, number one. Second thing is to securely control the access permissions and the access logins, whether it will be available for read privileges and all. So I can set up my policies listed over here. So right over here, when I click on the access policies, let's just take an example. If I have multiple users, I will add that user and I will define the permission. So let's say on the secrets, they will only able to read it. So the get and the list, only these two permissions. On the certificate, select all. On the keys permissions, only able to get, list, and backup. That's it. Nothing more than that. So I can have pretty much all these policies assigned that how these Azure Key Vault secrets would be accessed by whom on which different permissions. So I can always do that when we talk about Microsoft Azure for added permissions. And we can use it for secrets management, the keys management, the certificate management. And if you're on the premium plan instead of standard, you can have your hardware security modules, the HSM bagged keys as well, the hardware supported tokens based keys associations as well. So let's talk about the Azure Key Vault. What functionalities does it provide? How easy it is to configure and store those secret values centrally over the cloud. That was one thing. We quickly implemented an Azure Key Vault. We added some of the certificates to the Key Vault associations down there. Now, at the same time, when we talk about Azure policies or when we talk about tags management, the governance, the GDPR regulations and all, it's really important to understand how the policy framework actually works in there. So let's take an example. If I click on my Azure policies, I'm clicking on my Azure policies over here. I can have n number of policies and get them assigned to wherever I want to. But what is important over here, let me go and let me click on the assignments as of now. So you will see that I don't have any assignment, anything right across in there. I can assign a policy to someone. So let's take an example. that would be to this particular subscription. So I'm setting the scope at the subscription level, that whatever policies, just like your group policies at on-prem, I'm applying my Azure policies for cloud management down there. I'm applying it to the pretty much the subscription itself. Do you have some specific exclusions you would like to add? Well, that's fine. Let's go with the policy definition. What policy I'm assigning over here. So let's say if I'm having something related to tags, so let's say I'm saying require a tag and its value on the resources. I say it's always a best practice if we assign tags while we are deploying those resources, but it's not a required value. It's always optional. What if I would like to make it required and have this policy applicable to everybody in the organization, or some specific exemptions can be made over there? Let me click on select. I'm talking about tags over there, and let's call a demo assignment, whatever I would like to make it. Let's make it enabled, and I'm clicking on review and create, and let me click on create over here. On the list of parameters, the tag name. So let's say in my case, the tag name is going to be type, and the value has to be dev. That's the development, and I can apply it to my development subscription, or I can have multiple policies for dynamic tag generations as well. That's fine. Let me create this particular policy. You can see that total assignments one. Once you go to the overview, you'll be able to see compliance over here. Now you see I've got the compliance status, which is currently not started. It will be up and running in a couple of minutes. It's important when we apply those policies as a best practice, we should sign out from the portal and sign in again. Sometimes it may take 5 to 20 minutes to get them applicable. And from that point onwards, whenever I'm creating a resource on my dev subscription, if I'm not specifying the tag with the keys and values down there, it will give me an error and I won't be able to provision that particular resource. Well, that was just one example. You can have n number of policies listed and defined right across in there. So that was one thing which talks about the policy assignments, how exactly the policies are assigned and pretty much work right across in there. So this was one thing what we have as part of our AZ-900 schedule policy compliance regulations, working up with Azure resources down the line. At the same point of time, guys, it's really important to understand that what I was demonstrating, these are some of the walkthroughs which can help you gaining traction while you're preparing for your AZ-900 exam. Now, let's understand, if you would like to practice yourself, how can you do that? It's very important to understand. I've got the Microsoft Learn website. So let me just go Microsoft Learn over here, or at any given point of time, the best way to do that is you simply go to AZ-900 exam. When you click over here, so once again, guys, what I'm explaining you right now is that how you would be preparing for your AZ-900 exam, how you would be doing the walkthroughs with restricted environment and with completely to you, whatever you want to create based on your own Azure Pass subscription. So let's take an example. If I'm on AZ-900, first thing first, you should be having an active Microsoft account. So let me quickly click on sign in. And I'm using the same account which was created from us. So let me go another one, the one which I just created today. And let me explain you how the Microsoft Azure sandboxes can help you preparing yourself. Let me click next. If it's the very first time, you can always create the profile. Let's call it AZ-900 and would like to make it unique. Let's go with the details in here, and let me click next over here, and depending on complete your profile at the same point of time, let me hit next. And it's just a one-time stack in there. Let me go next. And now let's see. I'm on Microsoft Learn as of now. I'm on AZ-900. Important thing, I'll also be emailing you all these URLs, additional documentations and all, but just to give you these things over the chat as well. How I'll be doing, you can always schedule that exam. At the same time, You've got the instructor led, which we were doing today for a 1-day schedule. In 2-day, there is a 2-day program as well. The only difference is you'll be having hands-on labs on that 2-day program. In this case as well, we are providing you the Azure passes so you can do that at your own. Whatever you're looking for, module number 1, cloud concepts, 2, 3, and 4, the one which we completed today, when you click on cloud concepts, for example, that will take you for the introductions with all those things. What is important to understand here, you've got some exercises. You have create a free Azure account, which you can always do. The exercise takes you, go over there, start, provide, but that will ask you to have your card information ready and then specify all those details down there. What additionally you can do is when you go down, every each of these modules are coming up with all type of learn modules down there. So if you take a look on the cloud concepts or the Azure architectures or cloud services, if you click on Azure compute, you will see some exploration, some exercises right across in there. When you click on app services, for example, that gives you what an app service is, how does it work, and how do you start working. So these plans will also give you the preloaded sandboxes where you can start practicing yourself when you talk about working on Azure, but they are fairly very limited. And they are restrictive in nature because they can't allow you to create an Hadoop inside cluster and keep it running for 3 weeks and then incurring a number of cost over there. That's why they are pretty much restrictive. That's the first option which you can do. The second one, this morning, I activated my Microsoft Azure Pass. So that was my Microsoft Azure Pass.com. That was the site which I was using to activate my Azure Pass. So what you will be doing is, once you've completed your survey evaluations today, the team will touch base with you, will send you a Azure Pass, which is $100 worth of promotional subscription, valid for next 30 days. And you can do as many practices as you want in an unrestricted manner. So that'll give you plenty of chances to pretty much evolve a lot of Azure services down there. The third important resource is some of the practice questions. We did some quizzes already. I'll send you more quizzes down the line in there. But if I'm specifying over there, let me give you this URL that'll be available to you. And of course, I'll make sure I'm sending this to you over email as well. This is a multiple series. I've got 6 different series for AZ-900. Each is containing 30 questions. So you'll be getting somewhere around 180 questions, which are the exam patterns, how the exam will look like. So it's more important to understand it's going to be 1,000 marks exam. 700 is the passing criteria. It'll be 45 to 56 questions anywhere in between them. How the exam patterns cover up, there will be one or two case studies which will appear. So they'll give you a case study, and based on that, they'll be asking your opinion that considering these issues, what should be the best solution over there? And you'll be answering them over there. The case study is the only thing which you have once attempted. You cannot go back and reattempt those questions. That's how it's actually designed. Rest of all the questions will be completely multiple choice questions. There will not be any practicals in the exam. So they won't be telling you, hey, log into your Azure portal and show us how do you create an Azure Key Vault kind of thing. It's not going to happen. All of these would be multiple choice questions. The pattern will look like the one which you're seeing right over here, that how these things should be appearing. Some of them, one is going to be the correct answer. There could be multiple choice where more than one are going to be correct answers over here. So I'm going to send you, I've already sent you that on the chat as well. I will be sending you this over your email as well, so you can practice more when it comes to these Azure series right across in here. At the very first thing. Second, there is multiple series. So you're seeing series 01, there are 6 different series of 30 questions each, which will help you prepare for your very first cloud certification. And once you feel confident, let's spend 2, 3, 4 weeks analyzing, doing lots of practices using your Azure Pass, do some series questions from here. I'll also keep on posting you some good documentations from Microsoft Docs, docs.microsoft.com. And at the same point of time, you can always visit us on the events page, which will show you what are the upcoming events coming up, whether they are the full day events or whether they are 1 or 2 hours kind of webinar sessions down there. You can always get yourself registered to keep updated of these no cost events down there. Important thing about this, the next thing the team will be sending you is a promo code. So let me explain you to, these are two different things. Azure Pass is you all will be getting, when you're submitting your evals, you'll all automatically be getting your Azure Passes, which will give you $100 subscription so you can practice the way you want for next 30 days unrestricted. The second is going to be a promotional offer. That's definitely going from the marketing perspective of that. Anybody from you or your team would like to enroll on any of our upcoming instructor-led classes, whether it's the instructor-led or the live virtual classes. So whenever you do that, every course does have a cost associated to that. So whenever you open any of those programs down there, they do have a cost associated to them. That promotional code can help you for the next 60 days. If you would like to enroll on any of those programs, it's like a buy one, get one. You'll be buying one program and you'll be getting an additional program of your choice included in the same price, equivalent as like registering it at 50% charges down there. But that's for the paid courses down the line. So you've got some no cost, zero cost resources. I'll keep on mailing a couple of more informations, the exam series and all, and the team will send you all those informations. So this was the very first thing what we have as part of this 1-day event over here, guys. Now I'm completely open with the questions. Let's see if we have any questions, the maximum questions which I'll be able to answer. So I can always turn on the audio if you want. We can have the videos depending on however you would like to proceed, or have your questions over the chat. And let me answer all of them the maximum we can. All right, so let's see your questions on the chat, guys. All right, perfect. Let me touch base on that particular area as well. So it's really important when we talk about some of the cost related functionalities. The reason we don't touch base over here, because we just activated this subscription today. And if I show about that, let's take an example of subscriptions area. And you're not seeing any cost associated of that because it's barely a couple of hours and it's not generating those costs more frequently over there. But let me show you how that can help you when it comes to the cost management areas and having your cost analysis down the line over there. So for this one, I'm actually taking you to my corporate credentials. Let me take you to my corporate Azure portal. I'm in here. Let me go to the list of subscriptions. I've got multiples and I've got multiple ways of analyzing that cost. So let's take an example of this one, for example. So I've got this one listing up over here. And if you take a look on the subscription management, how I can estimate our cost and options right across in there. So let's go in here. You will see the cost, which is coming up by resource over here. The spending rate, currently I'm here, and the forecasting where I'm about to go at the same pace right across in there. What's my cost period associated? If you see the cost analysis, let's see it in a more detailed way of getting the subscriptions cost. And if you've got some promotional subscriptions, unfortunately for them, you won't be able to monitor them over here, but there is a separate site to monitor that particular cost. So let's take an example. On this Visual Studio, I've got the service name listed and got the cost association, like which one's getting and which one's costing me how much. At the same point of time, you would like to see the budgets associated if you're creating a budget and then having those values associated with that. Any kind of recommendations the Azure Advisor is generating for you in terms of costing analysis. But if you have some, let's say this Azure sponsorship, I'm not able to see any cost associated over here, nothing so far. For this one, for the promotional subscriptions, we have to log in over here to see component-wise costing. So let's take an example. If I sign in with this promotional subscription, the one which I'm capturing over here, and let's take a look. It is generating that. So I've got $6,000, $3,000 almost consumed, and 50% cost has been consumed over here. If I would like to see the usage details, let me click on the usage over here. This site, the Microsoft Azure sponsorship.com, is only for your promotional subscriptions. So that can give you the cost associated to one of your resources. You click over there and that will load all these components. So the virtual machine with this one is costing me the most. I've got the storage account for the disk write operations that is costing me $3 so far. So you can see the cost analysis in much ways over there first. And if you have a pay as you go or your enterprise subscriptions right across, you simply go over there, click on the cost analysis and get your cost varied, cost by resource, and then pretty much filtering them. How do you want to apply those filters at the same point of time? That is one thing which can help you monitoring your spends, budgeting your spends, and having a cost forecast on our Azure resources. This is what the actual comes up. If you're planning to put some of the services over the cloud across in there, you can always go to Azure Pricing Calculator. So that can give you a good idea that how the Azure Pricing Calculator actually works and how can we start working across in there. We've got a couple of questions. In the meanwhile, it's loading. What is the certification fees in INR? Well, guys, it varies based on country to country, but what is important, let me tell you something. Whenever you are on Microsoft site at any point of time, it is always giving you based on this particular country. You can change it from here one, or you can change the entire locale right from there. So I'm at EN US, English US. Let's go to ENIN. And now you're seeing the cost which is associated in INR for any of those certifications. So I can always give you that particular URL to everyone. That will help you analyzing the cost and changing it based on your preferred countries associated over there. That's one question. I've got another one related to some of the best practices in terms of which services should be used in which cases. So to answer that, there is a program called DP201 and AZ-301 designing the Azure solutions for solution architects. They are completely based on Azure best practices. But if the no-cost resources are concerned, I've got some of the URLs available, some of the white papers. I'll happily be sharing with you over email. Some of the best practices needs to be followed and they are keep on updating. So it's always better. I share you the Microsoft Docs URL and you have a quick go-to resources to check all the listed best practices in terms of development, in terms of costing, in terms of scenario analysis, in terms of product comparisons and all. All right, I got another question from Wendy. Is the hybrid setup advisable? Well, Wendy, the answer to that could either be yes or no, depending on what the situation is. For example, being a small scale customer, if somebody says, hey, I would like to do a web app hosting, should I be doing it on-prem? Should I be doing it over the cloud? Or some people says, let's have your web application on-prem and let's have your database over Azure for high availabilities. Well, I don't do that most of the time because of the small scale, small requirements. The capital expenditure goes so high. It's always good to have your resources deployed over the cloud. Sometimes When I talk about bigger enterprises, I've got thousands of servers. I don't expect those clients to go completely cloud over there. That's where the hybrid cloud situation comes in there. Sometimes there are restrictions. We've got some legacy applications. Doesn't matter if we want to, but it's not allowing us to move to the cloud. So considering that, we still have to run that on-prem over there. We've got some unsupported customizations running up, which cloud won't allow us to migrate. So we can always do that. It always depends based on the situation that we should be going on-prem or hybrid cloud or completely public cloud. But nowadays, when you talk about migrations, migration should not be considered just by copying and pasting data, pulling your virtual machines and putting them to the cloud. That's as easy as it sounds. Migration sometimes should also be considered like you've got some unsupported configurations, you've got some legacy apps, and we would like to get them migrated to the cloud. So we might have to redesign some of the business processes before we move them to the cloud across in there. So it always depends as in what situation needs to be followed. Right, perfect. Now coming back to the pricing calculator, which was coming up, let's see how can you start utilizing it. If you click, let's say virtual machine, storage, database accounts, anything. If I'm clicking on virtual machines, for example, you just added one thing. My virtual machine, I would be requiring some of the Azure functions as well, which I would be putting up to my VMs down there. So whatever you're selecting up in here, let me click over there. Now you see over here, first thing first, in which region you'll be deploying that. Now, these things were very less known for the people. We all think, hey, if the virtual machine's costing me $10 a day, it will be $10 a day everywhere if it's on the same hardware setup. Well, that's not really true, because when you change the region, it literally changes the cost. The difference might not be very much, but of course there's going to be a costing difference. So let's say I'm deploying it at my East US. My operating system is going to be Linux in this case, and I'm looking for pretty much my SUSE Linux enterprise for high performance compute. I'm talking about my basic tier, not very highly performance compute operations. And you start working up, I'm talking about 8 cores, 14 gig of RAM. I'm looking for one virtual machines, and on an estimated, if I do an auto shutdown, my virtual machine will be running 10 hours every day, starting up 7 o'clock in the morning, running up 7 in the evening. If I want to save cost by not essentially running it 24 hours, I can always do the auto shutdown scripts down there. So I'm going to run that for 300 hours in a month. And that pretty much calculates that if you're talking about pay as you go, this is going to be your estimated monthly cost, including your virtual machine consumptions down there. If you talk about the Azure Spot instance, Azure Spot instances, if you're committing for a longer duration, you'll be getting some discounted rates down there. What about the drives? So if I'm talking about standard drives, or I want to go for SSD, and that's going to be like a 1 terabyte SSD, that will drastically improve the pricing. It was like $1,400 a month. That's how it calculates. So the Azure pricing calculator is really a good tool for estimating what it's going to cost when you're doing some sort of budgeting or anything like right across in there. At the same point of time, sometimes we might want to do a combined pricing calculator, which will include the virtual machine as well, which will include my Azure function apps as well. So depending on how I would like to do that, now you see I've got these virtual machines listed with all these configurations. I've got my Azure functions listed. So because it is on the consumption model, the upfront cost zero, the monthly cost is zero, it will always go on the consumptions. So you can see that pretty much 100,000 executions are absolutely free. And then the first 400,000 GB per second of executions calls are free. And if you would like to go for a premium plan, then the cost will be involved on the function apps as well. So you pretty much click what functionalities do you want, start configuring it, the environment, the compute, the storage you will be requiring, and that'll give you kind of a consolidated quotation and estimated quotation based on the variables provided. Sometimes people ask, hey, I've got a virtual machine. The virtual machine is having an operating system drive, which is an SSD. And then I have two data drives. They are SSD of 500 gig each. Then I'm not using those data drives. They are associated with my VM, but I don't have any data underneath them. Am I still going to be charged? The answer is going to be yes, because the moment you create and assign those data drives, the storage is being allocated to you. They would be running hourly basis. Doesn't matter I'm using 80% of them or 20% of them, whatever allocation capacity I'm being allocated and assigned to the VM, that's readily available for me only, being the VM user down there. So that doesn't go like consumption based. Storage is not consumption based. Function apps are, that's correct. All right, so I've got another question over here. Looks like the promo code got answered. Once you have the promo code, do you have to activate it right after? No, the promo code would be valid for you guys for the next 60 days. Up till next 60 days, you can activate them anytime you want. They'll be available, and you can always get back to the team for any kind of support, anything's required. All right, got another question here. Let's go to my Azure portal down the line in here. And let me take you to one of my virtual machine, which is running in regards to your snapshots, restores and all. So let's click on this virtual machine listed down there. Important thing over here, that you've got the property, you've got the monitoring, you've got the capabilities listed. You would like to do a backup, you'd like to do the logs capturing, you'd like to do the updates management, connecting it through Bastion services, or replicating that to your Azure Site Recovery, the ASR. For that, of course, your site recovery services should be enabled. So you'll have to create a recovery services vault, which will help you doing a replication of your virtual machine. That's the very first thing. Putting up additional security as part of that, you can always do this. Another thing which you can do, which is not part of your AZ-900, but that's really good if you're aiming yourself for the solution architect kind of thing. You can talk about the extensions, the virtual machine extensions, and right over there, you can understand how the extensions are working over there, how you create and plan them, and pretty much the scripts which would be running on post boot, reducing your work in terms of manual efforts down the line. You'd like to put them into scaling, availability set, auto scalings, you can always do that. Any given point of time, you want to change their size, upscale them with the hardware concepts down there. You can always do that in terms of SKUs and sizing. All right. Let's see if I've missed something over here. Give me just a second. Okay, looks like almost all the questions answered over here. Just scrolling it up a little bit. Okay, looks like that's what we have in here for now, guys. And I'll make sure I have my contact information available to you just in case if we have some more questions or any future communication needs to be in there. How do we start utilizing that particular information? Great. Okay, so that's what we have for today, guys. I thank you very much for joining me today. I should see you in some of the upcoming events. Feel free to register yourself on these no-cost resources down there, and I'll keep on posting you more information about Azure and the upcoming programs as well. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the day and the evening. Have a nice day ahead. You're welcome. Bye-bye.